Oddio, che... papi, queste sono domande importanti. Devo cercare di dire delle cose importanti. Che dai una cosa e poi quello che ha dato lo dà un altro e fa così.
E la mamma e il papà sono una generazione e io e mia sorella siamo un'altra generazione.
Generazione vuol dire e la mamma, cos'era? Tutti siamo uguali, che gira in tutte le parti del mondo. Da grande voglio fare
Costruttore di auto.
il pompiere, la ballerina,
Chitarrista. Andare nei vigneti.
L'attrice.
Telefonare. Babysitter. Da grande voglio cantare. Cosa che viene domani, dopodomani, dopodomani. Tu è una cosa che arriverà.
Quello che ci sarà domani. Tutto ciò che deve ancora accadere.
Cosa c'è domani? È come il passato, ma è diverso. E poi quello che ha dato lo dà un altro e fa così.
La mamma e il papà sono una generazione e io e mia sorella siamo un'altra generazione.
Che tutti siamo uguali. Papi, queste sono domande importanti. Devo cercare di dire delle cose importanti.
Buongiorno a tutti e grazie per essere qui.
Siamo arrivati all'ultimo giorno di Made in Steel, in un'edizione che è stata ricca, come sempre, di testimonianze, ragionamenti, confronti e di dibattiti su tutto quello che è l'acciaio. Non solo la filiera è stata protagonista.
The value chain has been the protagonist together with the future geopolitics, generational transfer, technology, market. As we always do, we have tried to provide you with a 360-degree picture of the world of steel. And today we're going to add another brick to our story, and we're starting doing that, starting from a link in the value chain, which is the closest to final customers, closest to the technological frontier, and the most open to the innovations of the market. So also this level of the value chain is trying to tackle the challenges of an ever-changing macroeconomic picture, which is characterized by transient crises such as the war in the Ukraine or the energy shock of last year, as well as by long-term transformations such as the European Green Deal. And on top of that, we've got the challenges of emerging economies. We're going to talk about all these different themes today. The title of today's meeting is New Value Chains from Distribution to Use, and we will try to understand the development of the most important steel users and of the distribution of steel and service centers. And we're going to do that in the following way. First of all, through listening to our Ufficio Studi, Professor Tosini, our expert analyst, has prepared a very interesting analysis of short and long-term prospects of the steel industry. And then we will leave the floor to the protagonists of the value chain in a roundtable with Barbara Colombo, President of UCIMO, Emanuele Ferraloro, President of Arce Liguria and Vice President of Feder Costruzioni, Enrico Frigerio, member of the ANFIA Council, Paolo Fangoe, Acciai, and Federico Sanghi, President of Federmeccanica. But before starting, I would like to invite here Paolo Morandi, CEO of Cedarweb. Paolo, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Stefano, and good morning, everybody. Just let me tell you that, as you've seen, the baton has been passed on to me and Francesca. We are now the leaders of Cedarweb and Made in Steel. Cedarweb is the digital meeting place, the virtual meeting place. Made in Steel is the physical meeting place. And Francesca and myself immediately wondered, how can we bring Cedarweb into the future? How can we bring Made in Steel into the future? So we have asked some wise men and women, and together we've written down our strategic plan, which has a very strong idea, which is that of including also the part downstream of the value chain, involving steel users to fulfill the idea of a system, of a value chain. So we have a 5-year plan we believe in and we want to be committed to. And this edition of Made in Steel has the name or the title Generations, because the world we're confronted with is a new world, and steel needs young people. And young people need leaders to be able to tackle the future. My very special thanks go to you all. You are the most important part, and we work together with Assofermet, presiding distribution. This is our first meeting of this kind, and it is part of our strategic plan, so thank you very much for being here today. And without further ado, I would like to thank Istituto Toroldo in Bergamo and Professor Labile, Mechatronics, who's here with us, representing the future. So thank you very much. And I wish you all a profitable Made in Steel and a very profitable future as well. Thank you very much. So now Gianfranco Tosini is going to join me on the stage, and I would like to leave him the floor. Wow, I can see that there are some students in this room, so I will try to be didactic. more than I usually do. You can see here the value chain in the steel industry. The value chain consists of three main parts. Producers, i.e. the companies that you can see here on the left that are upstream. They produce steel, and then steel is transferred to the final users, which represent the last part on the right. In between, we've got another protagonist, the distributor. Distributors are wholesalers, i.e. people collecting the material from producers and keeping it in their stocks to be sold to the users when they need it. Then we got traders. These are large companies buying steel all over the world, stocking it, or they may have no warehouses and deliver directly the steel to final users. And then we have service centers. Service centers are sales centers that, prior to transferring the material bought from producers to final users, actually process the material themselves and give the users material that has already been cut, that has already been machined, and it is ready for some further processes. So this is the value chain. It is a complex one, as you can see, because upstream you can have two types of producers, the national, the domestic ones. So all the steel industries in a given country producing steel and delivering it to the final users via the distributors. And producers can supply the material in two different ways, either directly to the final user, and this is done when we're talking about big users, or going through the distributors. The same happens to steel producers abroad who can directly export to the users or can sell via the national distribution channel. Let's have a look at what has happened in the past few years. Did steel consumption increase or decrease? In this histogram, you can see in orange the overall consumption of steel in Europe. In blue, you can see steel consumption in Italy. And as you can see, in Europe, Italy has a significant share. But if you see the evolution in time, it is clear that both at European and at Italian level, steel consumption has gone down significantly. Because in 2008, i.e. prior to the big economic and financial crisis, more than 180 million tons of steel were used in Europe. Today, it is only 140. So we have sold a big number of tons of steel. So there has been a reduction in the consumption of this material. Which are the reasons for this contraction? There are many different reasons. From 2008 to 2022, many users have disappeared, or they have moved outside of Europe with the delocalization of their production sites. Another reason is a reduction in intensity of use of steel. What do we mean when we say reduction in intensity? It means that at equal production, less steel is used for many different reasons. I mean, think about the automotive industry. The reduction in the consumption of steel is due, number one, by the reduction of the number of cars produced, but at equal numbers, reduction of steel can go down because we are moving from heavier to lighter steel. And this has happened in many, many industries. On top of that, we got the competition from other alternative materials. if you have a look at the car, I mean, a car in 1970 was made of steel for 80% of its weight. Today, the weight of steel in a car has gone down significantly, due to the fact that cars have to become lighter and lighter, because if they're lighter, they use less fuel. Using less fuel, they pollute less, with fewer emissions of noxious gases in the atmosphere. Then, because many materials have taken over, polymers, for instance, aluminium, they have replaced steel in many components. So these are the reasons underlying the decrease in the use of steel. Which are the sectors that make use of steel? Well, the number one sector in blue is construction. How significant is construction? Well, it has a share of about 35% of the overall steel consumption, followed by the automotive industry in dark orange here. Then we have machinery and mechanical plants, 14%, metal products, 14%, tubes, 13%, electrical appliances, 3%, and other means of transport. These are commercial vehicles, industrial vehicles, ships, and trains. These industries consume different types of steel. So-called long profiles, such as rebar and mercantile or commercial laminates, are used by the construction industry. In blue, rebar for example, is used 100% in the construction industry. So it means that rebar is related to the dynamics of the construction industry. Flat products, conversely, well, here the percentage of steel used in the construction industry is much lower, with the exception of quarto plates that are used, say, for the construction of bridges. Flat products are predominantly used in the automotive industry, as you can see in this graph. Having said this, let's have a look at what has happened to the users in the time frame that we are considering, that is from 2008 to 2022. If we compare the dynamics at European and Italian level, the question we have asked ourselves is, well, the significant consumption of steel is taking place in other European countries or in Italy predominantly? Well, here you can see the overall number of the users, their consumption, and you can see the two curves, the Italian one and the European Union one in blue. The Italian one is in orange. So if we start from 100 in 2008, you can see that the two curves have evolved throughout the years. The situation is pretty tragic. Italy has lost in terms of consumption much more significantly than the European average. And as you can see, the gap between the two curves peaks in 2017. In 2020, we have the COVID pandemic. And in the last 2 years, the gap between Europe and Italy is narrowing. This demonstrates that the 2008 crisis that has lasted for several years has had a much larger effect in Italy compared to Europe. I'm not going to describe the reasons for this, but I'll mention one at least. Following the crisis in 2009, while the other European countries grew slowly but steady, we suffered from a decrease. I mean, in 2010, there was a recovery, but then we went down again because we had the public debt crisis. Italy is a country with the highest debt in Europe, and therefore the monetary policy obliged us to significantly reduce our consumption and our investment compared to other countries. And this influenced the consumption of steel in the different sectors of users. Well, we left the pandemic crisis with a recovery that is faster than the European average, and we have reduced the gap between Italy and Europe. Let's now see what happened in the different sectors. And let's start from construction. Making a comparison between the European average and Italy, we can immediately see that the drop in steel consumption in construction has been really dramatic. Consumption has gone down by 40%. I mean, we're not talking about peanuts. If you think that construction is a #1 sector for steel, we have suffered from the biggest downward trend in the years from 2010 to 2020. After the pandemic, however, we've recovered a significant share of what we had lost in the previous years, and as you can see, the two curves are getting closer. Why is that? Well, because from 2020 to 2022, the state provided significant support to the industry of construction to bring the activity of this sector to a higher level, therefore also leading to a recovery in the steel industry. Clearly, I'm talking about the bonus provided for refurbishment and restructuring of buildings. So the bonus has had a significant effect on the industry of constructions. Of course, with positive and negative consequences, but it is certain that this kind of measure has reactivated this sector. So the question is, but what about steel consumption? Has it actually gone up in a proportionate way? Do not forget that when you restructure a building, steel consumption today is much lower compared to building a new house or a new building. I mean, if you restructure a house and you provide it with a new insulation, you do not use any steel. If you build a house from zero, you use a lot of steel because you need it for the fundaments and for the building itself. So, as you can see, the construction sector has recovered significantly, but steel consumption has increased to a lower extent. So, what is going to happen in this industry? Well, the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience will be implemented in the coming years, making use of funds coming from the European Union. So this means that we will go on refurbishing existing buildings, but the plan also envisages significant plans for infrastructures. So unlike what we've seen so far, in the coming 3 or 4 years, there will be an increased demand for new infrastructures and for new steel, with a higher intensity of steel consumption.
Another thing which is present in this field are the trends concerning the types of buildings. In the next few years, we will see the so-called dry building techniques, the use of building materials made with a lower consumption of traditional steel. Like concrete, we will use, for example, tubular materials. If you've already seen in the new housing buildings, we have a new structural cladding. And this will have an incidence on the type of materials used, and so less concrete and more structural tubes. Let us look at another critical sector, the automotive industry. The automotive industry has also had a major impact because of the consequences of the crisis 2008, 2009, and also the pandemic. In this case, too, the effects on this industry in Italy have been much stronger compared to the European Union average. You see that there's a major difference, especially in the period 2012-2013. Here there was the crisis of the Fiat group with a drop in production. We were producing 1.5 million cars. Nowadays, we only produce 700,000 approximately. So we have halved the production of steel destined to the automotive sector. You see that the gap tends to close a little, but it's still a major gap. So what is happening in this field? You know that the automotive field is undergoing an important restructuring process from a normal traditional engine car. We will have totally different electric or hydrogen engines. We'll then have to see what is the final solution. And this changes a lot the kind of steel you use. Because if I take a traditional engine out, I'll need an electric engine. But the materials to produce an electric engine is different. And it's all the spin-off industries between the two, many which change. Many mechanical parts will no longer exist. So we'll no longer need to buy many of the steels we buy at the moment. The car of the future, what does it need? That is zero emissions of noxious gases. How can I reduce noxious gases in the environment? Changing the engine and making the car lighter. We will have to produce types of steel which weigh less, but they will have to be more resistant to stress. In other words, we say steel is more resistant if it's thicker. This is not true. We have some super thin steels which have very high shock absorption capacities compared to steels with a higher thickness. And so a lighter weight will lead us to develop new steels, the so-called self-residential steels or ultra-residential steels. The question is, but in the end, will we consume more steel or less steel? With the same number of cars, we will consume less steel. If this is true, it means that the importance of automotive on the total consumption of steel will be reduced compared to now. If today the weight of automotive amounts to 18%, in the future will be 16.5% if everything goes well. And then we have to bear in mind another aspect. In these years, we have the development of a lot of alternative materials to steel. Which kinds of materials? Polymers, above all. If you look at the electronic components on a car, much greater compared to the past. The electronic component wasn't that much for steel. It's not really steel, it's other metals altogether. And if these increase in value, they will partly replace steel. The machine and mechanical equipment industry. This is an industry which, in the darkest years of the Italian economy, have shown that they have a much higher capacity to resist. You see that the gap between Italy and the European Union is much smaller compared to the previous two industries. It's true that we've had a slowdown in production, but if you look at the dynamics, you realize that this is very, very different from the European average. What will happen in this field? In the next few years, there will be an important growth rate. And here we will have a structural change. We will have to change the new machinery and new plants, introducing what? More electronic components. So digital innovation, which has an impact on the structure of the car, a more intelligent car, and with less use of steel. And so in this case, we will use innovative types of steel. Which are these types of steel? The one we saw previously. They resist more, both to shock resistance, but also corrosion, high temperatures, major thermal excursions. These are the new materials. And then there's also a question of supply. The logistics of this industry will change compared to the past. We usually used to have just-in-time supplies. No one wanted to stock up materials because this cost. And we were working just in time. I need that number of tons, and I have to find them tomorrow morning or the day after tomorrow. This is becoming increasingly difficult because the value chains following the pandemic and then the Russian-Ukraine war have been reduced at a global level. We will have to increasingly shorten value chains, not just shorten them, but practically, if extraordinary events like those we've had in the past few years were to take place, I must have the possibility of finding materials rather rapidly. If I had a value chain which went from Italy to China because my supply was Chinese, and this created a series of problems during the pandemic because we didn't have enough ships, the Chinese were closed for the COVID when we were open and vice versa. And so there were misunderstandings and problems in the supply timing. We have had some stops in production simply because we didn't have the materials available. This will lead to a reconfiguration of the global value chains, as we saw before. A gradual coming closer between user and producer, so as to avoid all the problems we have had in the 2 years of pandemic. And so here we have the industry of metal products. They make components, these so-called instrument mechanics. And here the gap is even wider. This means that in this industry, there has been a greater drop in consumption. Why? Because the delocation process in the field of mechanics in past years has been felt in those areas which produce not so much the end product, but components above all. Where did we find these components? As far away geographically as possible. From Europe, we went to Asia. And in the majority of cases, we first produced them in Eastern European countries, and then we went to Asian countries above all. And so this differential starts from here. Because if I no longer produce in Europe, but I relocate, it's all consumption which goes to those countries where I have relocated. So what is going to be the dynamics in future years? Probably we will have to expect a reshoring, a return to the original country, or very close to the original country. For which reason? For the reason I mentioned before. The greater the distance, the more stress there is due to the physical distance between the place in which the component is going to be used compared to where the component is manufactured. So there will be a coming closer, reshoring. And this will get consumption of steel to increase in Europe in these industries. Production of pipes. The production of pipes can be made into kinds, according to whether the pipe is welded or not welded. Welded tubes, how are they made? You take a semi-finished product, the coil, and obviously this coil is turned and then it is welded. A seamless, non-unwelded pipe is not welded. What difference is there between welding and not? In the field of application, a welded pipe is subject to stress. And the more I subject the pipe to stress, and the more it tends to break. So in a welded tube, you can't use for drilling. So if you need to do drilling to extract gas or oil, first you use seamless pipes and then welded pipes for their transport, the transport of oil and gas. In this industry, and it is the only sector where these are used, Italy has always had a trend which was higher than that of the European average. This is the only industry which, with the passing of time, has shown a capacity for resistance or resilience to the economic crisis. For what reason? The reason is that Italy has specialized in time, especially in the production of welded tubes with a medium-small diameter and below 406.4 millimeters. In this specific production, Italy is a European leader, and it is the second world producer after the Chinese. So this capacity comes from this strategic choice, which was made in time, of operating in this specific market segment, producing tubes for all the different sectors, from structural pipes to pipes for the transport of water, or those used in the mechanical field, for example, advanced resistance tubed high-strength steels. And then the white goods industry. Here we have a reduction of the consumption of steel in the critical years by 50%. We have halved in just a few years the activity and the consumption of steel. And this trend, unfortunately, can no longer be inverted. And why? Because the producers of white goods in Italy are no longer there. Actually, they are there, but they have been acquired by major foreign groups. The last company which changed ownership is Whirlpool, which had acquired Ignis and other famous Italian brands, has now been acquired by a Turkish group. So in Italy, we no longer have major white goods producers. And the more you are acquired by foreign groups, and the more you expect in a few years' time some relocalization processes. That is, production from Italy or Europe shifts to other countries. And this is at the basis of that drop of consumption. This is a sector which will witness other relocations, unfortunately. And so the use of steel will be increasingly reduced. What kind of steel will we use in this field? Above all, stainless steel. And this can lead, therefore, to a special treatment of the surfaces. And then we have the sector of the industry of other means of transport. After the crisis, we have had a differential opening up. But with the passing of these years, these tend to drop. This means that this is an industry which has shown that it is highly resistant. Here we have Italian excellences. Think of the naval sector, where we have very important operators. And at a national level or supranational level, they are of a certain standing. Then we have the railway sector, where in the next few years we expect a major development in terms of railway tracks and networks, because train transport is quicker, more timely, with better means, which will partly replace road transport, both for road haulage and for passengers. Of course, we will have a major use of new materials, the new steels, the advanced high-strength steel and ultra-high-strength steels. So what happens in the short term for these sectors using steel? If we look at 2023, what do we see? We see that after all, 2023 will be a year of a changing trend compared to the second part of 2022, the second half, when there was a slight drop in the consumption of steel, which had rather alarmed us as to the prospects for 2023. But in the first quarter of 2023, there was more resistance than was expected. And so the end of 2023 will be less negative compared to the forecasts. In 2024, well, we could see a consolidation, a stabilization of the situation. We will go back to having both real and apparent steel consumption of a certain importance. In my opinion, perhaps in 2024, we will re-witness the same trends as 2019. You won't return to the levels of 2008. We'll never manage to reach these levels, not even with the national recovery and resilience plan. So what's going to happen in the different industries in 2023? The variations compared to 2022 are not that great. It's 0 point something if you look at Italy. If you look at the European Union, we do have variations, but they are rather limited compared to those we saw in 2021, the year of recovery after the pandemic. What is the most important thing is that Italy will have consumption trends slightly higher than that of the European average. And so these gaps will tend to be reduced further, because Italy has proven in the last 2 years that it has managed to recover the terrain it had lost, the ground it had lost in previous years. In other words, our companies have restructured themselves, they've reconquered market shares on international markets, and importantly so. And this makes us hope well for the next few years. Major changes from today to 2030, I don't really see this. There are just two industries which might lose shares: the automotive sector, for the reasons I mentioned before, and the white goods sector. In the automotive sector, from 18% will drop to 16.5%, and for white goods, we also see a drop. The building sector will vary, but just very little. There might be a greater change in the field of mechanics, especially tools, machine tools, but Italy has shown and proven that it is capable of resisting well. So this is the scenario from now to 2030. Of course, these are forecasts. These are forecasts we calculate on the basis of the knowledge we have today. What happens in the next few years? Well, everything depends on structural changes, which today we certainly cannot foresee. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gianfranco, for your very interesting overview about users, their present, and their short and long-term future. Let's now move on to the second part of our meeting. We will listen to the protagonists about their own expectations and prospects. I would like to invite Barbara Colombo, President of UCIMO, Emanuele Ferraloro, President of Acea Ligure and Vice President of Federcostruzioni, Enrico Frigerio, Member of the Board of Anfia, Paolo Sangoi, President Asoferma Acciai, and Federico Visentin, President of Federmeccanica. I have named you following in alphabetical order. Thank you very much. Right. I believe that we can start with the star industry, construction. We have seen that construction that contracted significantly in the past few years, in the last 3 years has been one of the pillars of our economic growth, a growth that has been supported by the bonus measures, by investments in infrastructures, which is the situation in 2023, and which are the prospects for the coming months. First of all, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much to Made in Steel and the organizers specifically for their amazing capabilities. Right. We have a little bit of a hangover, really, and a bit of a headache as well. What I mean to say is that, we have to start talking about the past to understand the present. The industry of construction, in the last 10, 15 years, and we've seen this in the graph that has been shown, has actually suffered significantly. From 2009 onwards, we have literally collapsed. Employment figures in our industry amounted to about 1.5 million people. In 2019, this had been cut down to 760,000. In other words, our industry had halved. Then came May 2020 with the decree envisaging a new mechanism for credit transfer, which has actually produced the boom. This has significantly helped our industry because we certainly recovered, but in a totally disorganized way, in a crazy way. So if we want to draw a balance, I don't really know whether this kind of approach has been profitable for our industry. For sure, it has increased the turnover. We have grown, and this is also demonstrated by consumption in the steel industry. We have started employing again, so it has really been a driver in terms of employment, and construction is a driver because every euro you invest generates about 3.5 euros in terms of economic spin-off. So it is a driving force. So this has been very good because it has changed the direction. 2019, we had a recovery. 2020, we had a decrease, but a minor one because of COVID. Then we had amazing 2021, 2022. This was not managed in the proper way. It did not work as it should have. There has been too much demand and too little supply, so that prices soared. On top of that, there was the energy price issue, so that the profit prospects were not met. The big groups, the big companies have on average an income that, or a profit which is about 3 to 4% of the turnover. And I've seen beautiful stands here in this fair, so congratulations. But we do not have big margins, high margins like other industries do. So in the last 2 years, our margins have gone up, but not as prices have gone up, because unfortunately, in the value chain, some manage to increase their margins, therefore reducing the margin of the final user, i.e. builders in the end. So which are my prospects for 2023? Well, I can see a trend that is upwards. There is growth because the effect of the different bonus measures are still felt. We're talking about 120 billion euro that the state has forked out. And of course, this is a big problem to be resolved. And I fully understand NEF because it is really complicated. So we still foresee a growth, but the growth is slowing down. And we're looking forward to the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience. Because, I mean, Mr. Draghi was against the bonus measures because we have to move on to the National Plan of Recovery and Resilience. But actually, our sector was not ready to meet demand coming from the plan and from the bonus measures. Our public administration has been very active, but is still lagging behind to implement the planned projects. So we foresee growth, but we foresee also many, many problems. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to another very important industry for steel, automotive. You have had some difficulties in the past few years, and you are facing a transformation which is not easy and which is characterized by confusion as far as rules are concerned. How is the situation today in your market? Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. And I can see many young people here, so let me explain more about the environment, because I do not want companies to be viewed just as those who are against environmental improvement. So let me explain my thinking about cars, and let me explain what we're trying to do to produce electric cars without engines. We haven't got the engines, we haven't got the volumes, we haven't got the electricity at a low cost. I mean, if somebody decided to do that in my company, I would say, I mean, you've been bribed to do something like that, because it is illogical to resolve a problem in this way, because you do not resolve the problem. I mean, people buying an electric car are wealthy people. They can afford it. So we're talking about 1.5 to 2 million cars that are bought every year, new, by the same people. The remaining 25 million cars in Italy, less than Euro 5, won't be replaced by electric cars because electric cars are too expensive. So luckily, the thermal engine has opened up a new possibility, and I hope that biofuel and hydrogen will become more and more important. So hopefully this part of production will be rescued, so to say. Italy is very strong as far as car components are concerned, especially for thermal engine cars. And if electric vehicles become predominant, then many, many companies will be in big trouble. I mean, it is easy to say, let's transform, let's teach, let's train. Okay, you can transform the personnel, but not the companies. They're two different things. It seems a simple concept, but people do not understand that. So that's a main problem. So right now, a big recovery is ongoing, and we're all very happy about that, in the sense that we are producing about 15% more than the previous year. So this means that slowly, slowly, we are going back to full capacity. But for how long? So which will be the impact of electric cars and possibly the end of thermal engine cars? It is very difficult to evaluate that right now. Thank you. Right. Let's now move on with the mechanical sector. We're leaving behind very difficult 1.5 years, especially for the volatility of energy prices and commodity prices. Which was the impact on the mechanical industry? Well, here, as Federmeccanica, we're representing the whole value chain because we include all mechanical industries in Italy. And we know that in June, big changes will take place in terms of contracts, and we're very worried about that. And in our industry, we have many different types of companies. We've got final consumers, household appliances producers and car producers, as well as all those who produce components. Just to give you an idea, we have 1.6 million workers referring to our industry with our national contracts, and 90% of our companies have a headcount of less than 10 people. So talking in general terms about this industry is not easy. However, we check the situation every 3 months, and the most recent data, those of December, show that there is some optimism, there is a recovery, so finally we can see positive signals after several quarters of pessimisms. But this recovery, I mean, this positive attitude rather than a recovery, is still significantly affected by margins. So margins are our biggest issue, and it is clear that we had to accept the increase in steel price, in energy price. The government has mitigated with significant measures this big issue, supporting the most energy-intense companies. But this has had nothing to do with the prices of raw materials that have increased, that have reduced our margins, because our companies, given their size, were not able to transfer downstream the increased price of commodities. Some may believe that this is a benefit. Some may view us as rescuers of our nation, because if inflation was kept within certain levels, this is also due to the fact that the price of cars, the price of electrical appliances did not increase so much as it would have if we had transferred the price increase completely. So today we have to tackle the increasing cost of labor. We have a contract with our employees that was signed prior to this situation. In autumn, we really feared for this contract to hold, and some companies took the initiative. The government did not support us in this respect, so we insisted on the problem of taxation of employment and the so-called fiscal wedge, but many companies nevertheless tried to support their workers. You remember perhaps when 3,000 euro benefits were provided by the government in the very last minute in December, like a Christmas present, that created a disorganized dynamic, which is no good. So this year, in June, based on the inflation rate of the previous year, we will have to tackle a significant increase, about 4.5%. And this extra cost will further reduce the margins of a sector which is not retracing. And that's the most surprising thing. I mean, we should understand how, when confronted with a demand which is not soaring. I mean, if demand is not particularly good, if the cost of scrap is going down, if the cost of energy is going down, how comes that the cost of materials, with a few exceptions, is not going down? I mean, this creates a complexity. I mean, downstream, we have big companies producing durable goods, They're very strong. They're multinational companies. They've got very strict policies, and they have a bargaining power. They're much stronger negotiators than producers of components that do not manage to transfer the higher costs. So we thought that as material prices go down, we could maintain our prices. But this is not happening, because as soon as the customers hear that the energy costs have gone down, they start asking for discounts. In January, they want us to lower our prices. And as far as raw materials are concerned, however, they are not bothered by them. So please, steel users, be happy with your excellent balances in the last 2 years, but do not ask too low prices from us. Otherwise, we will have significant problems this year. Thank you very much. Now, Barbara Colombo, President of Ucimo. So President Visentin has mentioned some optimism, but the complexity of margins as well. Do you agree with that? Yes, Ucimo is the Italian Association of Producers of Tooling Machines, Robots and Automation. And we are the organizers of the Lamiera Fair nearby, showing the excellence in the field of sheet forming machines. And I'm telling this to the benefit of these young people. Please come and visit Lamiera today or in the coming days. We're here until Saturday. Since we're talking about the future, our industry is looking for young people to employ, to design, install, program and digitize our machines. So please come and see Lamiera. Our industry, just to give you a few figures about 21 and 22. So after 2020, which was difficult for everyone, 21 and 22 have been two fantastic years in economic terms, with a double-digit growth of all most important indicators. I'm talking about production, consumption. So in 2022, for instance, we have reached 7.3 billion in terms of production, with an increase by 15%. And consumption has reached 6.6 billion, up by 31%. With deliveries on the domestic market for 4 billion, up by 27%. So we have reached record levels, doing better than 2018. What about the future? What about 2023? Well, 2023 started with a significant portfolio of orders, a guarantee for the next 9 months of activity. And I believe that in 2023 we will record another growth. In the first quarter 2023, however, in terms of new orders compared to the very same period in the previous year, we have seen a decline by 25% approximately. This is normal, because the previous year, as you all know very well, we moved from 40 to 20%, and a lot of investment were made. So our forecasts are good. We have made a statistical analysis, and we can see that we use 86% of our production capacity. In some cases, this goes up to 100%. So a small decline is actually physiological. There is not enough space to grow even more. So in 2023, if we think about the forming machines that you can see in Lamiera, we are the #1 in Europe, beating Germany, and worldwide, considering production, consumption, and export, we are second only to China. So we have a pretty good position. With the 4.0 transition and the incentives that were provided starting from 2016, compared to Germany, for instance, as far as consumption is concerned, we have recovered 3 billion. So there have been significant benefits. Wonderful. That sounds very optimistic. So it is a very positive situation. Yes, it is an extremely positive situation, even though we have all experienced some critical moments, also because of the Russian war. And this did not have a direct impact on our export because Italy exports only 3% to the Russian market. But for those selling to us pig iron, castings, and welded products, well, many of them were exposed to Ukrainian imports, and they had some difficulties, of course. Thank you very much. Now, to conclude our table round, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Angoi. How did the year start? And do you have an answer to the questions that were asked, even though he actually asked this question to the steelmakers and your distributors? I perfectly understand the appeal that has been launched, and I will try to clarify.
I'll try to tell you what is happening in this period and what has happened in the recent past. And above all, what I think interests us most is to try to understand what we have in front of us in the next few months, in the next few quarters. First of all, I wish to greet you all and thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the organizers. With my presentation, I'll try to give some ideas which will help you all to understand the situation. Starting off from an analysis of what has happened in the first quarter, in the first part of 2023. To have a quick look at what has happened in 2022, at least in the last part of 2022, when the steel manufacturers, and here I'll try to give a first feedback, that's where everything starts off from. So price is formed by the steel works, then there are the different steps of the supply chain, but we unfortunately are simply a go-between. So what happens upstream inevitably has repercussions on the prices which end users are obliged to accept. So the second semester of 2022 witnessed the steel works operating in extremely difficult conditions. They were crushed on the one hand by an uncontrolled increase of energy costs, and on the other hand, there was this weakness of demand, which in certain moments seriously put production into danger, the production of our steelworks. And in some cases, it actually obliged them to adopt a stop-and-go production system, which was linked to the daily cost of energy. So dramatic situations which saw prices drop until the end of the year, when between the end of November and the month of December, prices reached a minimum level, a trough. Then there was an attempt at recovery, an attempt towards recovery, which was successful in certain industries and others no. In the sectors of flat carbon products, reacted vigorously. The attempt for a rebound worked, and it woke up demand, and there was then a follow-up for the entire first quarter of 2023. We must add, however, that other products like long products or stainless steel flats followed a totally different trend. It was lateral in nature without important movements. And this takes us to the first quarter, when we witnessed a market with two speeds. The first was the speed of the steelworks, so a very robust price trend, which increasingly unleashed the apparent consumption, that is, the consumption which has as its basis in part some speculation too. And on the other hand, we had the distribution field, which obviously did not have alternatives to undertake an increase of prices, but the scope was much smaller than that of steelworks. So all this worked. It worked for the first 2 months, but after that, the market downstream, the market for the distribution and final use was flattened out, whereas upstream, the steelworks continued their path, increasing prices, with an increase in prices, reaching the maximum peaks which were touched a few weeks ago. At the moment, we are already in a downward phase, and to make forecasts on what we can expect in the next few weeks or in the next few months, well, a forecast by definition is wrong, of course, because it is extremely difficult to think what we can expect today. But the feeling is, and here I wish to take advantage of the Made in Steel event. Today it's the third day, so we have time to take stock of what has emerged. Well, what has emerged during the very great number of exchanges of information here at the trade fair does not make us think that there can be substantial maintenance of current prices. So the forecast in the short term is a drop in prices. And to turn to Mr. Visentin, my colleague, we as operators are exercising pressure on the steel manufacturers for them to not only reduce prices, which of course would give a breather to the entire system downstream, but we ask them also to make an effort in the near future to avoid there being these tensions which take place, bringing peaks in steel prices, and which generate speculative stages which have little to do with the finished product, because the finished product needs constant values, which unfortunately is not in line with the world of steel production. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go back to the building industry. Let me make a comment on the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. As an operator in the steel industry, as someone knowledgeable in this, I see that the PNRR, the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, is indicated as a great hope for the increase in the consumption of steel in the next few years. from your point of view, what it is right to expect, considering the delays which undoubtedly will happen. And in the house building sector, in the building sector, will you base your supply on the PNRR requirements or not? This is a very wide-ranging topic. I'll try to be brief and concise, not to take up too much time. In the meantime, the PNRR, I see this as a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it is certainly a move which, if it is used well, well, I can imagine an entrepreneur has the opportunity of having a lot of resources to improve, restructure, and create infrastructures within my company, which allows me to be more productive with higher returns, lower consumption levels. Well, I think that this is really great. Why? Because part of the money is lent to me, partly it's unrepayable. But if I do things properly, I've got to think that there's also part of the money I'll have to give back. Remember that we will have to give back part of the money of the PNRR. If we look at all this happening in a country like Italy, which has a national average in terms of timing, from the moment in which you decide to carry out a building to the moment in which the building is completed and delivered, we're speaking of public tenders, is around 11 to 15 years. From the moment in which the public administration says, this is something we want to build, it's of strategic importance, let me find the funds, organize the tender's won. If there's no appeal by the design study, the project is prepared, there's a tender for the tender. After that, the company wins. If there's no appeal by anyone else, and then the works should start, and the building is delivered. Usually, it takes 11 to 15 years in some cases. In this scenario, 2023, we've got to end by the beginning of 2026. Ask yourselves a couple of questions and give ourselves an answer. So that's my first answer. After that, the country requires new infrastructures. We will have to learn quickly. And I don't know if, with the new possibility, because in March and at the beginning of July, the new mechanism for the tenders foreseen by the Council for Public Works. I don't know if this tool is the right move in order to implement the PNRR, because the public administration was used to the old code of tenders. The new code of tenders has to be described and explained. There must be a learning curve. We call it the Salvini Code. He's a minister now. We tried to give him this responsibility. I don't know. Perhaps an extraordinary tender code for the PNRR will be published, which will manage to speed up the possibility of doing all this. I don't know. Obviously, this is a kind of criticism vis-à-vis the government. And I don't think the government has any faults in this. It's the result of mechanisms which have been in place for years. It was Mr. Draghi who asked for a new tender code, because it was the European Union asking us to do this. No one wants to say if it's someone's fault or not, but we've got to find the tools to react and manage to do practical things. In the building sector, the PNRR has foreseen 108 billion. Of these 108 billion, my dream would be to see all the money used in order to build new motorways. We're speaking a lot of the Genoa network, or a dam. First stone was laid, 1.2 billion is how much the tender is worth, won by the most important company in our field, Webuild. But we enhance the possibility of receiving goods towards our hearts, that is the ports, and then we don't touch the motorways and the railway tracks, which allow the goods and the steel to reach our production sites, processed and then put on the market again. So I think we need a greater holistic view, which in the long term can give us the possibility of improving and making the country more competitive. And then as far as buildings are concerned, the building industry is concerned, I hope the professor is wrong. Instead of 35%, we will have a 40% consumption of steel in our field, but without impacting the automotive field. Why? Because I hope instead that the automotive field will manage to keep strong, and there too we will have to reason for Italy as a whole for the industrial spin-off aspects. And then there's another matter which concerns the producers of equipment and machinery, always involving steel. In 2029, the European Union has decided that all generators for the production of heat will have to have an efficiency of 115%. It means that from 2029%, you will no longer have boilers with gas burners. Italy, together with Germany, is the most important producer of these systems. And for boilers, we have reached the highest level in terms of capacity. Just like for automotive, we run the risk that an entire industry, an entire sector of our industry will disappear and die in the next few years. We can't afford this. Let me give you some numbers. Steel is worth 66 billion a year. The building sector in Italy, a short supply chain, we were speaking of having a short supply chain, is worth 472 billion. So all the spin-off from the building operations generates 472 billion. This is an important amount of money. It's a strategic sector, and this is where the country has to think about things carefully and get it to work well. Thank you. Let's always continue with the PNRR. Let's give the floor to Enrico Frigerio, taking advantage of his business. He has a foundry. And let's link this back to the PNRR. There are many measures linked to energy, and I wanted to ask him for his assessment. And he was talking about, Ferralora was talking about, you know, what happens in the building sector. What happens for energy? Yes. Let me take advantage. Let me put the ASFOND hat on, because I'm also vice chairman, and I wish to reply in part, telling you what we're doing in terms of price. So pig iron is a very close relative of steel, only 2% of carbon more. So we're relatives, very close relatives. Our prices are updated on a quarterly basis. So when they increase, we increase, and so on. We have put higher prices vis-a-vis costs, and let us recover what we did in November 2021, when there was a first increase in the prices of electrical energy. For the PNRR, I hate the name. It's very difficult to pronounce. It's even difficult to remember what it means. And I see this in the world of renewables. That's the area I've been concentrating upon. Well, certainly there has been an improvement of the authorization, how many meters you can come close to a work of art, In Italy, we have so many churches. Previously, it was 1,000 meters. Now it's 500 meters. More space has been created. Some steps have been taken, small steps. But of course, yesterday I listened to the speech of Federacciai's chairman, who touched on all the different points. He also spoke of carbon capture. This is a wonderful thing to say, but at the moment, perhaps there's one pilot plant in Europe, perhaps. So they're pushing us to do certain things, but we don't have the solutions yet. And this is important. Another thing, if I have to find something which the PNRR doesn't really mention, I don't want to speak as an environmentalist, but nothing is said about water. Water is an enormous problem. If we don't solve this problem, if we don't make progress, all the different sectors will be in trouble. You might say, why is the foundry interested in this? Yes, remember that if without water, hydroelectricity won't be produced. Think of the prices there. This is an issue which is not dealt with. And if we have to speak of the prices of electrical energy, yesterday Gozzi said everything he could say. What we absolutely share with him is that at the moment it's not so much a problem of the cost of electricity, which is always double compared to when the crisis started. The problem is the differences with competing countries. We have a 30% difference with France and Germany. It's obvious that they are our main competitors, and this really bothers us. And as Mr. Gozzi said yesterday, Germany last year had allocated 200 billion for energy issues. The money was not used because they had put a cap at 140 and the price was below. But they said, okay, as we have the money, let's bring the cap to 160. It means that our competitors, starting from this year, if we pay 130, they will pay 60. So what can we do at this point? That's a problem. The government is still giving us a helping hand because there is a tax credit of 20%. Let's hope we can manage to resume competitiveness from other sectors. Thank you.
You are actually describing several tools and instruments that have been conceived, but it seems quite difficult to make use of them in a coordinated way in such a complex scenario. It'll be a challenge. Yes, it is very, very complicated. Another instrument provided by the European Union is the Green Deal, and this is a question for Mr. Visentin. We are moving towards zero emissions in 2050 with very demanding intermediate steps. So regarding the mechanical industry, what are you doing in this respect, and what are your customers doing? Well, we have already heard from the two previous presentations what is happening in the automotive industry and in the construction industry. So it is not only cars that have to take on a very difficult challenge. All industries may suffer from this, including burners. Well, first of all, we are bamboozled by this dynamic, but we have tried to defend the logics of technological neutrality, for instance, regarding the automotive industry. Tosini's data showed that consumption of steel will go down, and also the consumption of components will go down. An electric vehicle will have fewer components than the traditional cars with internal combustion, and this will therefore lead to a reduction in our industry by at least 70,000 jobs. I mean, all this has been declared and highlighted. Also because right now, this new trend does not guarantee a true improvement in terms of emissions in the atmosphere. However, nevertheless, this is how things are going. So we should try thinking in a different way. Europe is following dynamics which are no longer industrial dynamics, which are based on demand and supply. Europe is moving with the policies, say, on interest rates, where an attempt is made to bring down inflation. Increase inflation. Increase interest rates to decrease the inflation, as if Italy functioned like the United States. But our inflation is due to increased energy costs related to the conflict. And now things are slowly going back to normal. I mean, Europe is not surfing an economic recovery that needs to be mitigated, which is the case of the United States. So they try to explain this to us. They say there is a gap in the interest rates between Europe and the United States, and we need to mitigate that. But that is not relevant to us companies. I mean, if financial flows go looking for higher interest rates, this has nothing to do with us. Let's now turn to the energy policy. They tell us it is a fundamental environmental protection in terms of emissions. But of course, the automotive transformation has been determined by the German industry that has made a lot of investment in electric vehicles, and there's been a very strong debate in Germany amongst different car manufacturers. They were not all going in the same direction. Of course, we had Mercedes and Volkswagen who had invested a lot, wanted to make sure to have a return. Investments made in an industry which, well, I would say I've invested a lot in an industry which is not exactly what engineers confirm to be the best solution. I've invested so much, so I'll try to find every possible way to make sure that my investment has a return. Well, there has been an interesting debate with the government, and in the end, we all know the result. With positions that, of course, found a very fertile ground in the green and environmental logics. So we should actually learn the lesson regarding our country. I mean, there are dynamics that has nothing to do. This includes also the speculation of the steel industry that is still maintaining prices at a very high level. I mean, when confronted with these dynamics, what can a small mechanical company do? Very often these mechanical companies just process items for other European companies. We tend to say we are the most creative ones, we are the best ones. It is true, we've got excellent industrial machines, but also regarding components, believe me, there is a lot of effort, a lot of creativity. There is 4.0 that has allowed us to digitize, even though we did not make the real leap and change our business in many cases because we are small. So the key point, in our opinion, the turning key point is that we must be aware that our companies must allow to be the protagonists, and to do that, they need a better structure. We do not need to be larger, because many claim small is beautiful, the chain, the cluster, the supply chain. Okay, the supply chain works when there is solidarity across all the links of the chain. Apart from some virtuous cases, we do not have a chain that supports us. I mean, I've made an appeal to steel makers. I can appeal to car makers, electrical appliances makers. I mean, if they really want to safeguard their value chain, they should accept our price increases. There is no solidarity across the value chain. I'm sorry to say that. So how can we get up on this situation? Well, we have, first of all, to appeal to our companies. We must be convinced of the fact that if we have a good structure, a good organization, we can rethink about business, understand how competitive we are, which possible innovation could improve our situation. So all those companies providing components for car powertrains, what are they going to do in the future? They need to aggregate. I mean, growth has to take place quickly. We can't think about making or following an internal rhythm of growth. We need to push an aggregation on different business models that can shift and change the situation, that can attract also more talents, because a talent is not likely to go and work in a 10-people company. But we need space to create competences and skills, say also in terms of HR management. Our HR managers are the entrepreneurs himself, who at the end of the evening has to download the last truck. He or she hasn't got much time to think about how to attract talents. So the structure would determine the capability of changing quickly. And the challenges we have to take on are challenges that require prompt reactions. These challenges must be recognized in order to change the direction quickly. Endothermal cars. We know that we try to think about e-fuel and endothermal engines, but my appeal is, let's think about all the opportunities that derive from the electric vehicles, fully aware of the fact that these opportunities will be less than we used to have in the past, ready to invest in other industries. But we must do this immediately without wasting any time. And let me add the following on this point. The size is not significant only for our companies. If we have a headcount of 10, it is obvious we need to grow. But if we grow bigger, then we can also help our country to develop a true industrial policy. Very often, we have to appeal to the government. We say the government should do this, should think about that. I don't think that Minister Urso and the other ministers know everything, can interpret the future, and can decide where it is better to invest. The batteries, microchips, copper, lithium. He's discovered that there are mines in Liguria, and he's focusing on that now. But how can we trust this? I mean, it is big companies, just like they do in France and Germany, that interpret trends and determine trends, that together with the government, interacting with the government, can identify the best sectors where investment should be made, like we used to do in the past. In the past, we had an industrial policy. I don't mean to say that that was a good model, because it was one, and that was no good, but already the conflicts that took place in Germany between car manufacturers and the government that led to a decision is a good example of industrial policy where the industry has carried out a positive role influencing the government and defending their own interest. But how can we do that unless big players move in this direction? But we have no big players right now. So since we have no big players, then perhaps associations should do that. Federmeccanica, Confindustria should represent our high number of small companies, but it is not the same thing. Not only because maybe we are representing a wider scope of interests, which might also be a positive fact, but because we need investment. The investment has been made not only by the government, but also by the companies. So either do we manage to achieve this kind of dynamic in Italy, and while we're waiting for big players to develop, we must learn to attract them. And our country mistrusts golden power and other measures because we fear. So instead of leading the introduction of big players to the advantage of our country, we're still afraid of this. Thank you very much. Well, that was an interesting overview of the midterm. And a trend which is emerging is automation and digitization of the Italian production system and the international one as well. So a question for President Colombo. For Uchimo, this is a nice card to play, I believe. So since we're moving towards a digital world, what about the Italian machines? New generation machines have focused on the interconnection with the networks of our customers, with their management systems, and with the management systems of their customers and their suppliers throughout the whole supply chain. Many companies, and we also have a very dynamic working group at Uchimo devoted to the digitization of our machines. So many have moved in this direction because this is one of our objectives for the near future. We would like to support the physical value chain, which is product process system, with the digital value chain data, providing information that can give added value. This is a very important target. There are companies in our industry that are more evolved, others, the smaller one, which are still lagging behind. But the number one target right now is to achieve the level of predictive maintenance that complies with digitization, sustainability, which are very important topics. The technology available in terms of artificial intelligence, IoT, intelligent sensors that can be used in our machines give us good hope that in the short term we will be able to reach this target. It is an important target because it will propose new business models with new services that the producer of tooling machines can offer to his or her customers, increasing the cash flow. Because if I can provide predictive maintenance, I give an advantage to my customer, it is an advantage for me, and I achieve significant parameters such as reducing waste, reducing material consumption, energy consumption, therefore making the whole process and the production more effective. And of course, in this way, you also tie the customer to you. Yes, before asking Mrs. Sangoy to provide us with a summary, I have another question about building. We have heard in these 2 days that the steel industry will have to change to reach the target of zero emissions, but I believe that also the building sector will have to comply with the new environmental rules. So in this new way to build, I believe that materials will play a new role. How do you see the role of steel moving towards a zero emission construction industry? This is a very complex and articulated question. Well, I can further complicate it by saying that you got only 2 minutes to answer it. I'm joking, of course. It is a dream of every builder to have a lot of steel available at a very low price, 10 cents per kilogram. Well, that's a joke, of course. But the building sector has to face 2 challenges. The first one is the challenge of the market, and it is the most important one, and it follows what comes from the European Union. Right now, our buildings use up 40% of the energy consumption in Italy. So if we reduce energy consumption of our buildings, we will certainly improve our environmental situation. We have many buildings that are Class G and Class F. They were built in that way because we had a climate that allowed us to build without insulation, unlike Northern European countries that do to their hard climate had to think about insulation starting from the 90s. Otherwise, they would have frozen. So it is always necessary to understand the reason why things are in a certain way. Having said this, I believe that the construction industry is going to work very hard in terms of urban regeneration and improvement of the energy emissions of the buildings. But we also have the challenge of transforming our companies towards circular economy so that they can minimize waste and consumption in terms of energy when producing our goods, when building, in other words, and in the use of materials that comply with this kind of trend. As far as steel is concerned, we have already heard it these days. Production through electric arc furnaces produces about 80% of our steel. So the steel that we're going to use in the construction industry is strongly environmental friendly. So luckily from that viewpoint, we are very far ahead. This is for sure a spur to our industry to make an extra effort focusing on the advantages of this noble material so that in our designs we make a greater use of steel. Most likely, designers, and I would like Oiche to come and sit around a table with us, well, I've seen that in the construction industry, wood has been recognized as a very friendly material, but steel has resilience and it can be combined with insulating materials to avoid thermal bridges, and so steel could also be used more widely in our industry. There is a new market which is crystallizing. It is a site-off, that is a market envisaging pre-constructed elements that are then assembled on site. And I believe that this will develop significantly, leading to the refitting of buildings where everything is made in the company and then installed on the venue. This, of course, won't be possible everywhere, and its share won't be that high because we have situations like historical centers. I mean, think about refitting with cranes in the historical center, the Ligurian cities. That's impossible. But there is for sure a share of the market for this, and steel will be very useful in this respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now let us try to summarize what we've heard. We have tried to tackle this major medium long-term trend of the PNRR, Green Deal, and digitalization. This is also going to influence the way in which we distribute steel. How do you believe your work will change in future years? Well, as far as the PNRR is concerned, it is dutiful in this stage to give total trust to our government, allowing them to find the necessary agreements in-house to make sure that the plan is put into practice and can be used to the full. This is the hope of us all. This is an extraordinary opportunity to launch new investments and to give an enormous push forward to our reforms. And this is something we just cannot miss out on. The impact is going to be extremely positive on all the different fields, of course, the economic field, but not just. The social aspect is very important. And we will draw a major benefit from this. In numbers, the estimate for 2026, which will be the year in which the policy will come to an end, it is calculated that this will have an impact of 3.5% on GDP and a 3% increase in employment. These are important numbers, just like the reasoning, and here I refer specifically to us. This has a major impact on steel, because steel will be used in building the various projects. We listened to your opinion, and the more the specific sectors will benefit from this, and the more we will be in a position to work. Speaking of the Green Deal, well, here I would like to offer you a vision of what is happening at home amongst our member states. Our activities, namely retail, distribution and pre-processing, are not that energy consuming. We are not polluters, we are not major consumers of energy. Despite this, I'd like to point out that the topic is very much felt by each one of us. We are witnessing an enormous amount of investments on the production of electrical energy with photovoltaic plants in order to reach as a first goal self-sufficiency. But there are many cases in which the amount of energy produced is in excess of the quantity requested for one's own industries and processes. And so this lays the basis for the creation of an energy community. Lastly, digitalization. Chairman Colombo has already spoken of this. For us, the effect digitalization and automation can have lies on the epochal change of the workforce. There will be a transfer of competences from the workshop to the offices. Our plants will increasingly have probes indicating in all the different production stages data which will then be simultaneously sent to the software present in the office. The software will process the data and will automatically generate activities downstream linked to logistics, distribution and others. And so we will have to concentrate on training the new workforce with an inevitable improvement of competences. Thank you. Thank you. So we've seen these different trends, and another facet is competitiveness. Industry has been asked to change its production systems, and whereas in certain areas, the production systems of decades will remain unaltered because, well, Mr. Frigerio, there's a study of PricewaterhouseCoopers which says that Europe will go from a net exporter to a net importer of electric vehicles. So what do you think of this? And how do you believe the sector will be able to respond to these challenges? Before I take the floor, I'd like to ask Chairman Visentin, the customer which did not accept the increases must be half French and half Italian, because for us, they accepted everything. So it's a rather peculiar situation, I must say. It's a situation which we are keeping under tabs. This major group behaving in this way because a lot of Italian component manufacturers are in trouble because of the behavior of this Italian-French group. So how can the automotive sector defend itself? It's obvious, as we said before, that this is in an impossible to understand situation. The cars built in China are 50% less than those produced in Europe. If we expect export there, we have a 20% custom duties. If they export to Europe, they only have 10%. The Americans have put the rule that everything must be 40% for the tax rate and then 60%. So if we don't do something against this, we will be greatly damaged. I really agree with Minister D'Urso yesterday when he said that we've got to go back to producing 1 million vehicles in Italy. What I love most is that it would be nice if there could be a second manufacturer, hoping the first still remains, because I don't see them that much at the moment. Another thing, we need equal taxation. That's the least we can ask for. And then the cross-border adjustment, the rule which should, to a certain extent, defend all our companies in ETS. I'm not going to explain what ETS is. I think you all know. So that everything which will be imported from abroad, from countries which do not respect these rules, will be taxed. The problem is that everything starts from 2026. It appears to be just round the corner, but it's actually 3.5 years. And in the meantime, all sorts of things could happen. But it's a first step anyway. If we carry out major investments and oblige others to manufacture products which are the same or they are subject to custom duties, it's a good first step. I don't think that it's enough to protect us from the aggression of vehicles which are produced elsewhere. First of all, because they have major volumes. Secondly, because they have all the raw materials. And thirdly, because the cost analysis we do in our companies are not theirs. How they calculate their costs and prices is not the same way we do this. And all this allows them to do whatever they want. If I were them, I would be very happy, because their competitors have disappeared and they can come and do whatever they want in our house. It's a difficult situation to accept. I understand that we have to say we have to convert to electric vehicles, but I make a product which is not at all impacted by electric vehicles. This has an advantage. An electric vehicle is 2 times as heavy. And so when they have to brake, well, they need a much greater braking strength. And so I'm just happy. But I hope instead that internal combustion engines will continue to have a future because of problems you raised previously, that of the size of our companies. All those small and medium-sized companies, I just can't imagine how they can reconvert themselves. Moreover, at a moment when the components from 100 become 50, I think. That's only half of the components of an electric engine. And so I hope we can give them an alternative, because otherwise you'll just have to close down. There's no other solution. Speaking of future competitiveness for the mechanical sector, and here I ask Mr. Visentin to reply, is costs. So in Europe, metals and steel will cost more because an all-out decarbonization will be requested, which doesn't exist in other continents, or will take place with a much longer time span. So how can you maintain the competitiveness of your finished products based on steel to export them outside of Europe? I would love to refer to some things you've mentioned, but I'll avoid that. Let's just avoid speculation, because there's a path which has been adopted in Europe to be so rigorous in the environmental field must be seen as a final spirit, which is great, but at the same time this is going to imply costs. But then, first of all, let us avoid speculation, because unfortunately in these 2 years we've seen so much speculation. So many people have taken advantage of this. Some people say business is business. I don't agree. We should have a spirit of solidarity. But I don't want to repeat myself. It's obvious that we have to work on two factors. One was already mentioned, the fact that we have a world which is full of odds. You know that there's going to be inevitable increase in costs for the entire supply chain, and governments, starting from Europe, must find a solution to facilitate this system. So we have to make more available the economic power in the pockets of people, starting from Italy. Let's make more radical interventions on taxation if we need more purchasing power. Someone will have to shoulder the increases, and others instead will have to pay the cost for this. And let's leave it to the market. But remember that the market does carry out distortions. And reference is made to materials coming from other countries. We spoke of this previously with Mr. Frigerio. But we've got to think about this, because Italians, above all, have always been an exporting country. We know that the famous CBAM has been launched for custom duties. We want to defend our plants. How can we defend our plants? The Apache forts have never existed. There has always been a siege, and then everyone died in the end. And so there's no alternative. I am very much against a world increasing custom duties, hoping to make it short term. So think of rules for Russia to avoid exports to Russia. And then we see that the greatest exports in the metalworking sector ended up in Turkey. Why? Because Turkey is the gateway to Russia. So you can sidestep these issues. Custom duties can be sidestepped, and they also open up to an immediate and contrary reaction. If there is a contrary reaction, someone else will increase barriers. And at that point, we exporters will have to pay for this. That's the real problem. We'll have to check this out. Choices have been made for electric vehicles. I mentioned before, behind there's a German industrial policy with German industries who, in conscience, have decided that they're going to not be impacted from this invasion because they're in the premium. They don't care what Renault and Stellantis will have to do for lower products. If they have an audio at 10,000 euros, we can't make this. They don't care. They're in the premium bracket. So in this context, we can't make an appeal and say, let's be good. No, we have to be practical. If the automotive industry of utilitarian cars has cost factors, especially batteries, which are in the hands of the Chinese, this is obvious, well, these will arrive. So instead of trying to refuse them, they're going to arrive. Investments in Hungary. It's 2 years. They're looking where to go. Hungary. They'll come and they'll export their materials. They're also building their batteries themselves. And so this is inexorable. If it's inevitable, let's change our job, let's change industry. There are other industries. Let's adopt this point of view. Let's push on the size element for industries to find their path. But let's carry out government-level investments. D'Urso says, yes, we have to say this to everyone. But in the end, we don't adopt a precise guidelines. And so let's get a Chinese importer come to Italy instead of going to Hungary. Is it so impossible? Let's prepare a package. Countries go to knock at the doors of these producers. They go to make proposals. Hungary goes and makes a proposal to get them to go to Hungary. Let's make a proposal too, so we can convince them to buy components from Italy. This is state aid, they say. Well, what does France do? What do the others do? I wouldn't be bothered by these principles. I would invoke a healthy, pragmatic work which allows us to obtain the things we are interested in once for all. Yes, what you're saying is exactly the same with what the Vice President of Barbara Beltrame said 2 days ago from this podium. Unity and pragmatism instead of all going in a piecemeal, independent fashion. Let's turn to Ucimo. As Chairman Visentin said, we are important exporters. The Ucimo companies export 55% outside of the European Union. For you too, the cost issue might be felt in the future years. And I imagine that machine tools have a much higher value than that of raw materials in the response to custom duties. How do you see the future?
Well, yes, the tooling machine industry exports the percentage that you mentioned, which is approximately 55%, maybe a little bit less in recent times because we focused on the domestic market, given the existing incentives. Our main market abroad is the United States, up by 40% in the last year. Then we have Germany, with a minus 15% in the last year compared to the previous one. And then China, followed by France and Poland. Price is a very important factor for us because at international level, our main competitors are Turkey and China, and they really compete on prices, and you just need to see the exhibitors at this fair and in the La Mera fair as well. So when the steel market transfers a cost increase, talking about last year, the steel and pig iron castings went up by 60% in 1 year. The welded small metal parts went up by 45%. Well, this is a survival issue for us because that amount, that value has a weight of 50% on our products. So what we're asking to the steel world is consistency and transparency on the definition of prices and on the dynamics for price increase and price reduction. This is very important because since we build tooling machines, we cannot transfer this price increase on the price of our final product. So the longer the reaction time on a possible adaptation to a change in prices, the more we suffer from that. Luckily, the prices have gone down by 15–20% recently, talking about welded small parts, castings not yet. But we ask for a dynamic return to the previous prices whenever it is possible, and then the availability of the materials in general, because this allows us to avoid having to stop our production chain. Thank you very much. Well, To time reasons, I would like to ask my last question to Mr. Sangoi, asking to be concise. So the tools that have been implemented are, in your opinion, adequate? And then, since you work in the steel industry, we've heard many appeals to you as a representative and to our chain value in general. So which is the teaching, which is the take-home message after all what we've heard today? Well, we're talking about very important and very delicate topics. And I would like to make a very short analysis of the Green Deal, because we need some clarity regarding what we can expect. So the Green Deal envisages, and this is a European plan, envisages the reduction of CO2 emissions by 2030 by 55% and zero emissions in 2050. This is a very ambitious target. And we have heard this yesterday from President Gozzi. Italy is at a good point. We already have the structures. The electric arc furnace allows us to match these objectives or to reach these objectives. Most likely, in 2030, we will be able, for the most part, to meet this target. But this won't happen in the rest of Europe, where the production takes place predominantly via the full cycle, and the timing and the investments will take a much longer time. Personally, but on behalf of Assofermet, I can say that we share the principles that have led Europe to make this decision. These principles must be shared, but there is an issue which is related to the significant cost that the world of steel has to bear. So there will be a progression, a progressive reduction of ETS certificates, the free of cost ones for steel mills, and this will be compensated by a fee, a tax on the import that will be based on the CO2 emission of that specific producer. All this will have an extremely high cost. And right now, there are no alternatives to transferring the cost downstream. So the final product will include all these extra costs. On top of that, CBAM, right now, and we are working together with the authorities and institutions so that they understand how critical the law can be unless it is changed. So as if this was not enough, CBAM will strike only the high level of flows, that is the steel raw materials and not the finished products. What do I mean to say by this? I mean to say that the producer of a manufact in Europe will have to come to terms with the increased cost of the pre-processed steel used, and at the same time will be exposed to the competition of the imported products coming from less performing areas in environmental terms with a double damage. So on one hand, costs will soar, and on the other hand, competitors will be there that could actually jeopardize the whole system. So we have the feeling that politicians, and especially legislators in Brussels, do not understand how critical this measure is going to be, because there is a distortion. Regarding the message by President Colombo on greater attention to costs, we understand this very, very well. On our side, we all pay attention to our communication with customers, and we are trying to do better. So we will try more and more to support our customers, because it is our objective, as we have always proclaimed, to enjoy a healthy market and healthy customers, because it is only if our customers can work well that we can draw some benefits. But we're also very, very active. Our association is very, very active in Brussels for constraints of any kind, CBAM or safeguarding measures. Safeguarding measures only aim at defining production quotas, whereas CBAM aims at contrasting environmental dumping. So these are two totally different measures, but in the end, their effect in practical terms is quite similar. So the battles that we are fighting are ASSOFERMET battles, supported by our customers with all their activities. In other words, it is a tough commitment that we have undertaken in the past few years. We have different ways open, and we hope that we will be able to create a better dialogue, a more exhaustive dialogue. And let me say that our host Made in Steel, like Paolo said in his presentation, has the target for the next 5 years to create a greater value chain, starting from steel production to the final users, going through what we represent here, which is distribution and pre-processing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Barbara Colombo, Emanuele Ferrarolo, Enrico Frigerio, Paolo Sangoi, and Federico Visentin for sharing your opinions, ideas, and points of view. Thank you very much for you to staying until the very end. Don't forget that Made in Steel is still going on, and this afternoon we will have an event called Steel, the New Future. We got our appointments in the Cedar Web Arena and on the second floor in room Beta. Thank you again, and enjoy your day in Made in Steel.